Yeah, but you're all dark and twisty inside.
Dark and twisty.
So, just to start this off, I did actually have a different case planned for this episode, but I stumbled upon something that happened in a town near me back in the 90s that I had zero idea happened. Not only that, but I started going down this rabbit hole of a fucking case, and I only got more mad. Not just because of the actions of the bozos that I'm about to talk about, but mad for the families and the victims, and the so-called justice that they received. Now, before we get started, I do want to put out there that this does have to do with a school shooting, not in the way that you would think, but the results are still the same. Now, I won't be talking too much about the shooting itself or the injuries, but more of the actions that led to it, along with the aftermath. I understand that because of the world that we live in today, and because this does contain the murder of small children, that this might not be for some of you, so listener discretion is really advised. On Tuesday, March 24th, 1998, in Jonesboro, Arkansas, the Westside Middle School students were interrupted by the fire alarm going off. Now, the teacher's response to this fire alarm was panic, considering they would have known if it was a test that was scheduled for that day. As the students lined up and were led outside for the drill, they began to hear what sounded like firecrackers, only to quickly realize that they were being shot at. At first, the shots were fired one by one, hitting both the ground and several students and teachers. Then, the shots began to ring out more quickly. Several staff members called 911 during this incident.
911, where's your emergency?
This has been a shot at Westside Middle School.
911, where's your emergency?
This is Westside Middle School. We have several children down. We need more than one ambulance.
Ma'am, we've got all
We
the
need
ambulance.
police too.
We've got all the
We got
ambulance.
shots fired.
As the police began to approach the scene, officers were informed by the 911 callers that they had seen two suspects running into the woods. Quickly, one of the officers turned off a side road close to the school in hopes of locating and cutting the suspects off. But what he found was two young boys dressed in camo running from the scene. Police detained 11-year-old Andrew Golden and 13-year-old Mitchell Johnson. The two boys, who had also been Westside Middle School students, were read their rights, while police searched their pockets, finding multiple weapons and ammunition. Once police had the boys in custody, they located 13 fully loaded firearms, including 3 semi-automatic rifles and a ton of ammunition. When police searched Mitchell's mother's van, they located a ton of supplies as well as a crossbow and hunting knives. It turns out the boys had planned to escape and live off the grid while police looked for them. Now, I don't want to dive into the childhood of the boys and try to give them an excuse for what they did, like the lovely Dr. Dorothy Lewis did, because I don't feel like anything that happened to one person should cause them to harm a bunch of innocent lives. However, I do want to talk about a few incidents that I read about that I would consider some major red flags. So, the reports would show that the boys were not close friends. Mitchell was in 7th grade and Andrew was in 6th, and the only time that they actually spent together was on the bus to and from school. Mitchell, who was 13, claimed himself as a gang member. He was actually criminally charged with molesting a 2-year-old, and he was set to attend his juvenile hearing the summer before the shooting. Unfortunately, though, any information related to those charges is sealed because he was a minor. Even though Andrew's parents would consider him a non-problematic child, his neighbors reported that he was known to shoot his BB gun at animals and other children, and he once killed a neighbor's cat and dumped its body in the trash can. Although this was never reported, some of those neighbors came forward with this information after the boys were arrested for the shooting. Police were able to come up with some of the pieces as to what happened that day once they interviewed Andrew and Mitchell after the shooting. The boys state that Mitchell missed the bus that morning so that way he could steal his mom's van and load up with supplies. Once he arrived at Andrew's house, together they loaded the van with camping supplies, snacks, and a map of where they planned to make their escape. They attempted to break into a gun safe inside Andrew's home but failed, ultimately leaving them to grab whatever handguns they could find that hadn't been locked up. They then headed to Andrew's grandfather's house, broke in, and located 4 more handguns throughout the home, along with the keys to the safe for his grandfather's high-powered rifles. Once the van was loaded up, the boys drove to the location just outside the school and parked the van so that way they could head by foot to the location that they planned for the attack. Around 12:30, 11-year-old Andrew Golden was spotted by another student pulling the fire alarm and then running back outside. It was then that he had met back up with Mitchell just outside the woods near the exit of the school known to be used during a fire drill. In total, 87 students and 9 teachers evacuated the building that Mitchell and Andrew had targeted. As the boys began shooting, some were able to get back into the school while others fled for safety at the nearby gym. Bullets were heard hitting the walls from the inside of the gym while they were there taking shelter. The shooting lasted several minutes before the boys attempted to run back to the van and make their escape, but thankfully were apprehended by the police. They were both charged with 5 counts of capital murder and 10 counts of assault with a deadly weapon. Ultimately, Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden shot and killed 4 students. Stephanie Johnson, age 12, who had no relation to Mitchell, Natalie Brooks, age 11, Paige Herring, age 12, Brittany Barner, age 11, along with 32-year-old teacher Shannon Wright. Unfortunately for the families of the victim, this news of the charge would only infuriate them more, as they were invited to join a meeting with the police so that way they can explain the charges and what that would mean for the boys. In Arkansas at the time, in order for a juvenile to be tried as an adult, he or she must at least be 14 years of age on the day that the incident occurred, especially when it comes to a capital murder case. Since Mitchell was 13 and Andrew was 11, the boys would only be held until age 21, and then they would be released with a clean record and no further supervision from the courts. During their trial, the boys both heavily placed the blame on each other, saying it wasn't their idea to shoot anybody. The pair claimed that it was the other one who came up with the plan to go to the school and scare some of the students. Both of them state that they don't remember shooting anyone, just that they were shooting at the roof and the ground around them. Neither of them claimed to know why the other one stopped shooting at the roof and started shooting at the teachers and students. In this plan, no one was ever supposed to get hurt, and they only did it to prove that they couldn't be messed with anymore. Both of the boys were found guilty on all counts and flown to the Juvenile Assessment and Treatment Center, the state's most secure juvenile facility at the time. Before the boys were sentenced, Judge Wilson commented that the punishment for these boys will not fit the crime. They were ultimately sentenced to serve the following years until their 21st birthday at the Juvenile Detention Center. Mitchell was released in August of 2005, while Andrew was released in May of 2007, and their records were sealed. After Andrew Golden was released, he soon changed his name to Drew Douglas Grant, but that information had not been released to the public due to a gag order that was in place. It wasn't until Andrew tried to apply for a gun permit with his new name and lied about some of the details of his past that it was declared illegal for him to carry a firearm, and he was denied. Andrew ultimately died in July of 2019 after a head-on collision with another vehicle. His wife and child were also in that vehicle but made a quick recovery. Now, after Mitchell Johnson was released in 2005, 2 years later, he was arrested on charges of carrying a loaded pistol and possession of marijuana. The vehicle that he was in was being driven by a guy named Justin Trammell, who met Mitchell at the juvenile detention facility that they were both housed at. Justin had been incarcerated after pleading guilty to the 1999 crossbow murder of his father when he was 15. According to the officer who detained the pair during the traffic stop, both the boys gave the same address to where they were staying. Justin was cited for careless driving and released, while Mitchell was arrested but later released out on bond. He was ultimately found guilty of possessing a weapon while also possessing drugs. Days after his conviction, though, he was arrested again. In June of 2005, he was finally released to probation and placed in a drug facility. Now, there's so much more that I want to get into on this case because, honestly, it is a fucking shit show. The fact that these boys were released after they had killed 5 people is just outrageous to me. Again, I know that this is not something that a lot of people like to listen to or talk about because it is such It's such an awful thing that happens in our country almost daily now. But this is something that happened a while ago that I think we all should be aware of, that, happen, that these things can happen, because this is just wild to me.
Yeah, but you're all dark and twisty inside.